help you excel. It's not just our name, it's our mission statement. Okay, in today's video, I'm going to pick up where we left off with Microsoft 101. I'm calling this Microsoft 102. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how you can add a combo box to the order form. One of the unique things about Microsoft Access over most database programs is that you can actually build some interface elements directly onto your tables. So for example, this order table that we looked at before, right now it's just displaying an order ID. So customer 1 equals customer 1 on this table, or Bob Smith, and customer 4 represents Paul Sassy, etc. But what if we want this column to display the actual name from the customer table? The value that's going to be stored is still going to be 1, 4, 5, 4, 6, etc., the various numbers, but with Access, you can display information from that child table right here on the table, on the order table itself. So the way you would do that, first we highlight the field where we want that to display, and then down here on the bottom, we click on Lookup, and right now the control is just a text box, but we can make that be a combo box, and then we can here in the row source, we can write a query to pull data from that related table. So the way you do that is you click on the ... right here. And now I'm going to drag in the customer table. Typically, you want the primary key from that table to be the most left-hand column. So I'm going to put that there. And then I want just one other column that displays the first name and the last name. And to do that, I'm going to do what's called concatenation. So first I'm going to do inside square brackets, last name, close my square bracket, ampersand, and then I want to separate first and last name with a comma and a space. So just inside of a double quote, I'm going to do comma space, and then another ampersand, and this time I'm going to type correctly first name. And now when I run this query, we're going to see we have our primary key in the leftmost column, and then we are concatenating together the last name, comma space, first name. And that's how I want that combo box to appear. Now I can also order this so the combo box appears in alphabetical order. So now when I run this again, you'll see Mary Jane is first, and each of those are now in alphabetical order. Now when I close this query window, it's going to ask me, do I want to put this resulting SQL statement in the property? And I do. So I'm going to hit yes. So here's that resulting SQL statement. If you don't know SQL at all, I would recommend learning it, at least on a rudimentary level. And I do have a separate video that discusses specifically SQL and goes through some examples of some basic SQL. But just real quickly, so we're telling it we want to select the customer ID column, comma, so commas separate your columns, and then here's where I did my concatenation, last name, comma space, first name, and then the keyword as, and then my alias. So I named that column name. What table are you selecting from? So we're selecting from the customer table, and then this is your order by clause. So I'm ordering by last name, ampersand, comma space, ampersand, first name. Now the bound column, that's the column that's going to actually store the value in my order table. And if you recall, when I typed this query, the column that had my ID in it is column 1, the leftmost column. So this is going to be my bound column, which is the default. So I want that to be my bound column. Column count is 2. So my column count here needs to be 2. For my column widths, I do not want to actually see that primary key. So column 1, I'm going to give it a width of 0. And column 2, I'm going to give it a width of 4. So you just separate those out with semicolons, and you'll see it puts in the little inch marker there. And then list width, you can either let it stay auto, or I often will have it match what I'm doing here. So the list width will be 4 inches now. So now when I open this order table, instead of seeing the numbers, I actually see the names that go with these orders. And if I were to start a new order now, I don't have to go look at the customer table to find the correct customer. I can just select the correct customer here, and I can put in a date, and I can put in an amount. Okay, so now you could actually enter in orders directly on this order table without even having to look at the customer table. And now looking at this order table, just even directly in datasheet view of the table, it becomes a lot more useful. In the last video, I mentioned that I was going to expand this out so that you could actually add items to orders. So that's what we're going to work on next. So first, I'm going to create an additional table. And first column, as always, is just going to be ID. We're going to do auto number, and we're going to make that the primary key. This is going to be my item table. So I'm going to call my first field just item description. Short text. Now here, we didn't talk about this last time, but when you define a field as text, you can define a field size. It will keep your database size down if you limit these to the max that you'll ever need. So like an item description, 255 characters is a pretty long item description. I'm going to limit this so it has to be 100 characters or less. I do want that to be required. I do not want to allow a zero length. We haven't talked about the difference between null and empty set, but if you leave this as yes, then it will allow empty set, which to the eye is going to look like null. It's going to look like there's no value there. I'm going to also add item number. Now this is going to be a unique item number, or SKU is another way that this is commonly referred to, that the user enters that's a unique number for each item. Now, I'm not going to use the primary key for this because you always want your primary key to be arbitrary and you want it to be managed by the database system itself. But there are instances where you need a separate unique number in addition to the primary key, and you can do that. I'm going to make this so it can be no longer than 20 characters long. In fact, you know what? I'm going to make this be 10 because you can have an awful lot of item numbers with 10 characters, and that should be plenty. We definitely want this to be required. We do not want it to allow zero length. Now for indexed, I'm going to choose yes, no duplicates. So now that's going to force that this item number will be unique. You can never repeat it. And then I'm going to have an item cost field here, and I am going to make it required. And I am also going to not allow a default value. Now, let me show you why I don't want to allow a default value before I change this. I'm going to save this table, and I'm going to name it item, keeping with our naming convention. Each individual row of this table represents one item. So I'm going to name this table item. And now I'm going to enter in just a little bit of data here. And let's say item number W125, wrench, 1.25 inches. Now, because there's a default value here, I don't have to actually enter an item cost. And so it would be really easy then to make data entry error and make that wrench have a $0 cost because it's not forcing me to enter anything in there. So that's why for these numbers, especially, I do not like having a default value unless there is some sort of default value that makes sense. But most likely for an item table, you're never going to have an item that's free. So now by removing that default value, the table, Microsoft Access, will require me now to enter something in here. So if I were to do wrench 038, wrench 3/8 inch, and you know what? I'm actually going to take those double quotes out because that could cause problems down the road. Because I don't have a default now, and I've made that column or that field required, if I try to commit this record now, it's going to tell me you have to enter an item cost. So there's no way for me to accidentally mark an item as free. If for some reason it is a free item, then you can still enter 0, but you have to intentionally enter 0 instead of the possibility of accidentally entering 0. So that would be a couple of examples of where good design can help make sure that your data makes sense. Because if I had left this as a 0 default, you could potentially have data entry error where they just forgot to enter a price for this item. But the way I have it now, that's not possible. They can't do that just accidentally. Now you see what I'm doing here with item number. Actually, this should be 5. So what I did was W for wrench dash, the first place is for inches, and then the last 2 are for fractional inches. So this one is wrench 3/8, 0 inches and 3/8, etc. And using a system like this, having 10 characters will let you have an awful lot of item numbers. So 10 characters is more than enough. Even 5 would probably be enough. So we want to keep that item number as small as we can while still making sure that we have enough room for a large item list. So let's do hammer 1, 2, 3, 250. I don't know. Just so we have a few products here. Okay, so for now, 3 is enough, and we can add more as we go through. Next, we need to have a table where we can say, okay, this order includes whatever items. Right now, we don't have a way to do that because this table is 1 row per order, and each order could have multiple items. So we have to have another table where we can put the items for the order. And the way you would normally do that is you'd have a table called order detail or something along those lines. So that's what I'm going to call mine. So ID, auto number, primary key, that's just reflex. We do that all the time. And now we need a foreign key to the order. So we know which order these items belong to. Yes, we want that to be required. You'll see here Microsoft Access automatically made this an indexed field. We'll talk more about what indexes are at another time. But the reason it did that is Access recognizes whenever you put the word ID in a field name, it's probably a foreign key relationship. So it's going to automatically index that field for you, which in this case makes total sense. I do want that to be indexed. So now I also need a foreign key to my item table so that I know what item is being ordered. So no default. Yes, I want that to be required. So for each of these now, they're foreign keys, no defaults. Yes, they're required, and they're both indexed. Now I don't need the date because that's going to be on my order table. I do, however, want to put the cost. I'm going to put item cost. Now what you might be thinking is, wait, we have the item cost on the item table. And you're absolutely right, we do. But you also want it on your order detail table because prices change over time. So if you use this database for a few years, and for example, your wrench is $250 now, but in 3 years, maybe you want to charge $450 for that wrench. If you don't put a price here on the order detail table, and you go look at previous orders when the price was smaller, was lesser, it's going to look like they paid that greater amount. And I'll show you what that looks like in a view here in just a little bit. But typically you do want to actually store the item cost on the order table. The other reason you might want to do that is if you're applying a discount to an item for some reason. Maybe the item is normally $1.25, but you're giving it to them free on this order as a loyalty reward or what have you. So you want to have a way on the order itself to record what the price was at the time of the order. And then last thing we need is a quantity. How many of those are we going to order? Okay, I'm going to also make that required with no default. I'm going to do the same thing on the item cost. I'm going to take away that default value, and I'm going to say that it has to be entered. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this item ID be a combo box, similar to what we did on the order table, so I can see what item they want to order. So I'm going to go here to lookup, and I'm going to go to combo box, and I'm going to go to my row source and click the little dot, dot, dot. This time I want the item table, And I'm going to drag in the ID number, put this like that. So this one's going to actually have 3 columns, and what I'm going to have display on the table is going to be just the item number. But when you click the drop down, you'll actually be able to see the item number and the item description as well. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. So that's good. I'm happy with that. This allows me to see the item number, the description, as well as what the current price is for that item. So I'm going to close that. So my bound column is still column 1, but now my total columns is 3. And I am going to do my column heads this time. I'm still going to do 0. That item number is fairly short. I'm just going to do 1 inch wide. And I'm going to make the description 4 inches wide. And now for my list width, I want to do the total of the columns that are displayed. So in this case, 5 inches. Okay, I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it order detail. And now I'm going to open this up. And for now, I'm just going to manually enter in an order ID. So we have an order number 1. Now here in the item ID, because of the way I built this, we can see the item number, and then we can also see the description and the price. So I'm going to do H123. And now you'll see as soon as I'm done selecting the item, the only thing that displays is that second column. So when I'm looking at my table, it's nice and compact. I don't have this big long description. All I have is the item number. But if I need to remind myself what that item is, you can click and then you can see the description. You can also see the cost, which is really helpful because then you don't have to remember what those costs are. It's just right there, $250. You enter in your cost and then you put in a quantity. Down the road, when we get into building forms and things, you can actually have it automatically fill in that cost for you on the form. But for now, we're going to let that be manual entry. I'm going to enter another item for that order 1. And this time, let's do H125. And H125 costs $250 also. And let's say they want 5 of those. Okay, so now we have, for our order, we have that detail for us. I'm going to actually change my design a little bit because it doesn't make sense to have a field where you store the order total on the order table, because we're going to calculate that total rather than have it stored on the table. So I'm going to save that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build those relationships. We haven't done that yet. So we're going to go to Database Tools and go to Relationships. And here we have our order to customer relationship, but we don't have our order detail relationship set up yet. So I'm going to drag that in here. And order ID relates to ID on the order table. I'm going to enforce referential integrity, but we also need a relationship to the item table. So I'm going to drag in my item table, and item ID relates to the item table. So there's my hierarchy now. Typically, I try to, as I'm building this view, go from general to more detailed. It's not required. You can let these be hodgepodgey however you want, but it's easier to look at and discern the structure of your database if you have these kind of organized nice and neat. So I usually try to do that. It gets harder as you get into more complicated databases to try to get these arranged so that they're easy to look at. But for now, that's nice and easy in the eyes, and it's easy to see that structure for us. So I'm going to save that. And now a neat thing is going to happen. When I go into the order table now, just like before, I've got this subtable now. So you can see this order number 1 from Bob Smith. He ordered 2 things. You can see exactly what Bob Smith ordered. And even if we go back to the top of the structure and go to customer now, I can go here to Paul Sassy. I can see he's had several orders. Order 2 has no items yet. I can expand out. And now I can actually put items on that order. Oops, I didn't put in a quantity and I did the cost wrong. So 2.5, and let's say he wants 25 of those. And now we're going to put in that one. Yeah. $125. I don't remember what the actual price was. Am I giving him a good deal? Nope, I did remember right, $125. So now that order has those two items on it. Okay, and we can add additional items here to our heart's content. TS 023 toilet seat. Let's say $10. I don't know. So we added a new item, and now when we go in here, it is immediately available to order. So there it is, toilet seat. I said $10, so we're going to put item cost $10. Now, I told you I wanted to show you an example of why we put the item cost on the item order table. So let me go back here. This is an older order. It's from 11.1. In fact, let's make this so it's even older, like this was from 3 years ago. And maybe 3 years ago, these were each $1.75. So this is the price the customer actually paid for those items. Okay. Now, if I were to write a query now that I can, allowing me to see sales, I go here, I do item, I do order detail, and let's say I do this, and I go order date, item cost, quantity. Now, when I run this, you're going to see this item cost came from the order detail table because that's what they paid back on November 1st, 2020. They paid $1.75. This item cost comes from the item table. This is the current price of that item. If I were to run a historical report and take this dollar amount times this item, or sorry, take the current price times the quantity, I'm going to get a wrong value. It's going to look like this line item was $5 when in fact it was $3.50 because the price was cheaper back then. So your order detail table, you actually do want to record the price of that item on your order detail table. So here, even with just 4 simple tables, we've got a fairly functional order entry system. And obviously there's a lot more you can add to this to add complexity, like maybe you have item categories, for example, discounts, amounts, maybe additional, there's just all kinds of things that you could add into this in terms of extra detail. But we have a fairly functional order entry database now without writing any code or even any forms. In future videos, I will show you how to start creating some forms, and we will start with forms that you can create without writing any code whatsoever, just using Access built-in tools. And then we'll expand from there and show you how you can customize even further by writing some custom code.